Time to time, I conduct interviews, and when the topic concerns the React key, I most often see a puzzled look. What is there to discuss? If you think the React key is simple, then let's conduct a mini interview. Imagine we have an array of 3 users. The user structure is very primitive, with only 2 fields. ID is a unique identifier, and the second field is name, which is the user's name. Let's try to render these users. To do this, we will use the familiar map function to iterate through the user's array and the user component, where we will use the ID as the key and pass the name property to the component. Let's see what the user component looks like. First of all, it is a pure component, which means the component will only update on the props change. In the render method, we return the name received from props and nothing more. Next, let's add a console.log in the component didMount method, which will indicate that the component is mounted and display the user's name. We will also add the same console.log in the component willUnMount method, and the last console.log will be placed in the component didUpdate method, where we will compare the previous name with the current name. The component is quite simple, and I've decided to write it using classes for a clearer understanding of its lifecycle. Let's go to the browser to see the result of our work. We see a list of 3 names. In the console, we also see 3 entries, specifically didMount for each user. So far, everything is logical and predictable. Now let's move on to the actual question. Suppose the name of the first user has changed, the ID of the second user has changed as well, and nothing has changed for the third user. The question is, what console log entries will you see? Take a minute to think about it. You can pause and try to answer on your own. Well, let's compare answers. In the browser, we see that Alexander has changed to Maxim, and Dmitry and Anton seemingly remained unchanged at first glance. In the console, we see the following logs. The first is willUnMount for Dmitry, the second is didUpdate. Alexander changed to Maxim, and the third entry states that Dmitry has returned. Please write in the comments whether you answered correctly. If not, what was the mistake? Let's figure out why we got these particular results. In the case of the user Anton, the key and name before the changes match the key and name after the changes, and I remind you that the user component is a pure component. Consequently, no component renders occurred, and therefore no entries appeared in the console. User Alexander changed the name to Maxim, and when the props change, the component is rendered, so it is logical that the component didUpdate is called. Therefore, we've seen the entry in the console indicating that the component was updated. And the most puzzling user, Dmitry, despite the fact that the user component is a pure component and we did not change the name, something still happened with the component. Specifically, the previous user, Dmitry, was destroyed and a new clone of Dmitry was created. This is evidenced by the entries in the console, willUnMount and didMount. This is the essence of the React key. If before the updates, the key existed, and after the updates, the key disappeared, then it doesn't matter what the key was assigned to, the component will be destroyed in any case. Conversely, if before the updates the key did not exist, and after the updates the key appeared, then the component will be created from scratch in any case. Although from the user's point of view in this example you will not see any changes, Dmitry remained as he was, the difference may only be noticeable in more complex components, or when there are a lot of users. I assume you've grasped the concept, but any theory needs to be reinforced with more complex examples. As you know, there is a debate in the React community about whether to use the index as a key. On one hand, people say absolutely not, and have even written an ESLint rule that prohibits using the index inside the key. On the other hand, some people use it and do not experience any particular problems with it. To understand this issue, I would start by checking what the React documentation says. When you don't have stable IDs for rendered items, you may use the item index as a key as a last resort. We don't recommend using indexes for keys if the order of items may change. This can negatively impact performance and may cause issues with component state. Check out Robin Pokorny's article for an in-depth explanation on the negative impacts of using an index as a key. We will consider how exactly it negatively impacts performance in the next example. Let's take the same users, but now there will be 5 for better clarity. Instead of the ID, we will use the index as the key. The user component remains unchanged. As a result, in the browser, we see 5 users, and in the console, we see a single didMount entry for each user. Next, the following happens. The second user, Dmitry, is removed from the list. And here comes the question, what logs will appear in the console after the updates? Pause for a moment and think about the answer. So, the result will be as follows. The first log and the most controversial one is willUnMount Andrei. It is controversial because we deleted Dmitry, but Andrei was removed. The next 3 logs clarify what actually happened. We see didUpdate for 3 users. Let's go over again what exactly happened. There were 5 users, and we start thinking as a user, meaning we clicked the button to delete the second user, Demetria. Accordingly, we expect that only the component of the second user will be removed and the other components will remain unchanged. Now let's consider how React sees this. Before the updates, there were 5 components. Each of them was assigned a key. After the updates, there were 4 components. Each of them was also assigned a key. Then React, using the same key, relates the component before rendering to the component after rendering. Now let's look at which names correspond to these keys, and here you start to understand why the logs were exactly like that. In the component where Dimitri was, they simply passed a new prop name with the value Anton. Accordingly, we saw the did update log. The same thing happened with the next 2 components, so we saw did update in the console 3 times. Key equal to 5 ceased to exist, so that's why we saw will unmount Andre, not will unmount Dimitri. If we used an ID instead of an index as the value for the key, everything would have been completely different, and indeed only one component containing the user, Dimitri, would have been deleted, while the others would have remained unchanged. This is exactly the kind of negative consequences that React documentation warned us about, and element deletion, as you understand, is not the only case when we can have extra renders. The same applies to drag and drop, adding a new item in the middle of the list, and even more specific situations. For example, imagine that the users acquired roles, regular user and administrator, and depending on the role, a corresponding component, user is rendered for a regular user, and a component admin is rendered for an administrator. We still use an index for the key, and here again, we deleted the user Dimitri. What do you think? In this case, what logs will appear in the console? I won't reveal the answer, I'll leave that for self-study. If you were able to learn something new from this video, then the best way to thank us would be to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and of course, don't forget to turn on the notification bell. Bye.